My name is Isaiah Diesel, and I have a podcast called rhepodcast, Respect, Humility, and Empathy. That's where I usually have an atheist co-host, and we usually talk about a variety of issues very respectfully. I mean, it does get a little bit contentious, but the key thing is that we're not trying to like overtalk each other or be disrespectful. We're legitimately trying to understand where the other person is coming from. So does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Sounds great.
And I think we got another
like
Aussie here.
We do indeed.
And where are you calling out of?
I'm coming from New South Wales in Australia.
So I did not know you guys had bears in Australia. I thought you guys only had koala bears.
But drop bears, don't forget drop bears.
We always have drop bears, yeah.
I've actually
yeah.
I've heard that koala bears aren't actually bears. Is that true?
True, that's right.
Okay, all right. And can you tell us very briefly about your channel, please?
Sure. Well, I launched my channel a couple of years ago, just responding to online religious videos, a little bit of humor, a little bit of education, and basically just exploring ideology, religious ideology, and breaking down perhaps where it could be perceived as hypocritical, or it could be perceived as, something contradictory, or the impact of ideology, generally Christian ideology, on an individual and how they present themselves.
So I want to get right into the most controversial topic that's going to present itself today. But the first controversial topic is going to be, why don't Aussies pronounce R's? Okay, we'll probably make this whole podcast. You said
it's a pointless letter. Who needs it?
And then bear, because I live in Australia. I live in Korea. And the Koreans can't pronounce R's and L's. So it's totally understandable because they don't have it in their language. But why don't Aussies feel the need to pronounce the R's? That's the $1 million question.
Okay. Probably the same reason why Americans pronounce 2 R's in water. They say water.
Water.
There's only 1 R in water.
Yeah.
Here's another one.
So you take our R. That's the meaning behind it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I live in South Korea. We call Australia down under. Do you guys call Korea up above?
Uppy people.
All right. No, let's get serious.
My flat Earth friends would take great umbrage at that. They'd be like, they're not. We're all on the same level, and then there's the dome.
I see. All right. So before we get started, we just like to talk about something very, very briefly, because we do have some serious topics today, namely being whether or not atheism is a cult or not. But
Sure.
I just want to ask you guys a couple of questions because I just want to gauge you a little bit. All right. So if you had to have a pet, either a koala or a kangaroo, which would it be?
I'll go koala.
Why koala?
Easy to look after. They sleep 23 hours a day. You put them in the tree, they're happy.
All right,
yeah.
Here we go. Crocodile.
So mine was kangaroo, because there's a fun story. My dad, who recently moved on, we had a pet kangaroo as a kid. It was called Qantas. And it was the cutest little thing. And they're little nugget poops that even if they do on the carpet, you just pick them up and you're fine. It was so cute. Like, there is nothing cuter. If you've ever gone up to a kangaroo and you want to pick it up, you just like hold open a sack, and because it like behaves like it's its mother's pouch, they just do this cute little forward roll and they tumble into it. They're the cutest little animals. They're really common pet here in Australia. I mean, not legally, but they are.
Next question. Crocodile hunter or crocodile Dundee?
You go.
I think I'd go hunter, because
Hunter?
I think they're both equally badass. But you mean Steve Irwin, right? We're saying Steve Irwin versus But like, then I've got to add in, he does all of this quite cool work about like preserving habitats and stuff like that make me go, yeah, he's pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. I'd have to go with Steve. Yeah.
All right. Good. Thank you very much. And last question. If you had to get killed by any horror film monster or villain, who would it be?
It'd have to be Freddy for me. Freddy Krueger.
Freddy.
You want to get killed by Freddy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, See, I'm thinking of something that just like taps me on the shoulder and I go to sleep, but I think you're going more like coolness. Why Freddy Krueger?
It's such a badge of honor.
All right.
Like, yeah, you got me.
You think of one?
I'm struggling to think of like, I guess something like Cthulhu would be cool because I'm now going to your side, Mr. Bear, where I'm like, something rises out of the sea and scares everybody and then goes like marching through Sydney looking for me particularly. They'd be like, he must have been pretty special. I was like, no, I was just delicious. But yeah,
All right.
maybe it's like the badassness would influence it.
Okay. That being said, we want to get into the topic of our discussion. Now, I know that Mr. Bear is a former Catholic, but Mr. Harry, can I ask you, did you have a former religion?
I was weekly Christian Church of England, like vaguely.
Anglican?
Church of England.
And where would you rate your atheism on the docking scale right now from 1 to 7?
I think it's silly to have a positive view of a non-existent thing. Like, I think it's strange to go, I know that this isn't the case, but I put it still pretty highly. So
6?
I would, where is Dawkins' scale?
Dawkins it says he's a 6.8 himself.
Right. 6.8 out of what? And 10 is, I know that there is no God.
No. 7 is, I know there's not a God.
What a silly scale. Yeah, I'd put myself around a 6.
Well, for the record, the reason why it has to be an odd number is because you have to make room for a genuine agnostic. So that has to be at a 4, which if it's 1 through 10, you can't really do that. You know what I mean? I guess you could.
Right.
No, never mind. Yeah, you can't really do it. So, and what about you, Mr. Bear?
Oh, if I had to, I'd probably put myself around 6.5 or something like that.
6.5.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I prefer soft atheism as a term rather than a scale. Yeah.
So let me preface this by saying I am a former atheist before I saw the light. I'm a Christian now, and both of my parents, though, however, were former Catholics who later on became a Protestant. And my parents are Mexican, Latino. And so very specifically for my mom, after she converted, the rest of the family didn't want her to be alone with her grandma because they were afraid that she was going to convert her. So it's kind of a crazy story there. But all right. So getting started, that leads into my first question for both of you.
So where are you on that scale out of interest?
Oh, I'm an absolute 1. I know God exists. I've experienced him. So yeah. But okay. That being said, the first question I have for both of you is, what is easier to deconvert from, Catholicism or Protestantism?
Well, look, this was a really good question, and thanks for having us on. Well, when I thought about this, I had to admit that deconverting from Catholicism was in some ways fairly straightforward in relation to the fact that Catholics can't seem to keep out of the 24-hour news cycle. There's always one in there somewhere doing something that contributes to someone deconverting somewhere. And now, so look, and that's a bit of a sardonic view of it, but if we're to look at it in terms of spirituality, my connection to Catholicism, the basis of it was really steeped in a deep Roman Catholicism, and originated from a family basis, and which was heavily centered around guilt and feelings of guilt and sin, original sin. So what I'm trying to get to is that I had to get over the sensation of guilt and in relation to how I felt towards a God, or my concept of what a God was. That was the harder part. It wasn't so much the Catholicism itself in terms of the catechism or in terms of the dogmas or bulls or the papacy and those sorts of elements, because those elements I always saw as something essentially man-made. It was always
even when you're a Catholic.
Well, it took a long time because I had to learn the history I had to go around what I was taught and indoctrinated into, of course, which is what a lot of people experience. They're essentially taught the dogmas of the church and the doctrines. However, I had to learn the origins of those doctrines and the origins of the Catholic Church to realize that a lot of this was edited and, you know, redrafted, re-edited, reissued, and changed over time in comparison to what people were saying, contradicting what people were saying in terms of an eternal message of the church. What I saw was, in fact, the opposite. So that took a long time to come to, even as I was a Catholic. Yeah, I had to admit that there were various contradictions within the church itself. And so that took a long process. But in terms of deconverting itself, it was relatively easy to get out of Catholicism itself. Yeah,
that is a very interesting take. I really appreciate that. If I'm going to try to be objective about this, there is a lot of truth to what you just said right now. There was a girl who I was kind of like dating, more just like an intimate relationship with, and she actually happened to be Catholic, and I was like Protestant, whatever. But she wound up opening up to me later on about being like abused by her grandfather, like
sure, yeah,
after he had died. And
yes,
she was like, yeah, I don't really know I could be Catholic, like, I guess because she hadn't processed it at the time, so she was doing all the catechisms or whatever, and yeah, we were still having like a very intimate relationships at the time. I was like way back in college days. So she told me that was like, she's like, I don't really know I could keep going to this, like, you know, knowing this. So I can understand that. From my perspective, I could be wrong, but I would think that the Catholicism would be easier to deconvert from, because of the fact that there's like, it's not like there's not like a lot of power behind it. Like, you go to the services and they could put you to sleep, man, very easily put you to sleep. Where I go to church, we're clapping, we're jumping up and down, we're shouting, and
yeah. And to me, that really enhances the experience. That really brings something else to it. See, it wasn't purely the church services, though. There were also the street parades and the festivals and the very Italian Roman Catholic culture to it that was very entrancing and very interesting and very involving. So there was a cross connection between family, humanism, food, celebration with the church and with these parades. And that was a part where I had to sort of delineate myself from, you know, what I was drawn to over to compared to what I believed in. There was a separation there as well, which was hard.
And so let me ask you this question right now. How long has it been since you deconverted?
Since the end of 2018, so not very long ago at all. Yeah.
And how old are you?
Well, at the moment, I'm 46.
Wow.
Yeah, so it took a long time.
I got to tell you something, the honest truth. You literally might be the oldest person I've ever heard of deconverted, because almost everybody I know deconverts in their 20s or 30s. So
yeah, I understand. I mean, I did in some ways. I mean, it wasn't, I didn't draw the line in the sand, but I did in many ways experience Buddhism. I explored a vast number of religions at that time as well. But I never really let it go. Yeah.
So actually that should lead me right into my next question, which is, if you could choose any religion to true, which one would it be?
Probably out of all of them, when I put them all on the table, it would be Jainism, because it essentially is a very humanistic religion. And the only supernatural part of that is reincarnation, I believe, is one of the supernatural elements of that. And reincarnation, I don't really have much of a problem with if it was true. Out of all the beliefs, there's no gods involved. There's no no blood sacrifice involved. There's nothing Abrahamic about it. It's quite appealing in many ways.
And what about from what I've heard, it's closely related to Buddhism. Have you briefly mentioned Buddhism? I will tell
Yeah.
you this. Whenever I was an atheist, I started getting all the world religions like tattooed on me to like spite my parents, because it was, my parents are ministers, and it was
Yeah.
like, it pissed my mom off to the nth degree. I mean, the last the last time I ever saw my
Yeah.
mom, the last time I ever saw my mom, she saw through MySpace. Someone showed her my MySpace page, and I'd gotten an Egyptian, the Eye of Ra tattooed on my chest, which is
Yeah. Okay.
you
Great.
see that?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was
Yeah.
mad, but I also got Buddhism, Islam. I got pretty much all the major religions tattooed on me. What other, or what religion would you just be most upset if you found out that it was true?
Probably any one of the Abrahamic religions, to be honest with you. Yes, because there are so many conditions and so many what can you say?
Stipulations?
Stipulations, conditions. There's so much baggage in there, objectively, that I'd struggle with it. To be honest, I would struggle with the character of the God of the Bible, for instance. I
Sure,
would
sure.
struggle to relate to that character. Yeah.
Sure.
I would tolerate that character, but I would find it very hard to respect them
Sure.
in some ways. Yeah.
Sure. That's a intelligent answer. So I did look into Buddhism and Islam. Actually, I actually went into Palestine.
Now,
No,
that would have been great. I would love to go there. Yeah.
13. I went there in 13. Yeah, they totally accepted me as their own. I stayed in a mosque for like 7 days.
Yeah, that's
And
cool. Yeah.
I learned
Yeah.
the nicest people I have ever met. So much nicer and hospitable than the Christians I've met in my life.
Yeah. Wow.
It's not really saying much, but the Christians I've met have
At
been.
least you're honest.
Yeah, well, I will
Yeah.
be honest in this. Yeah, well, because my parents put a lot of pressure on me to go to Bible college. And when I went to Bible college, it was right in the middle of the Clinton impeachment. So they were like, oh, I did not have sexual. They were making fun of Clinton. And I had like this sexual trauma in my past that I had not dealt with it yet. And it just made me like recoil, and I had so much fear and hatred towards it. And I got so much worse. Like, had they been open and like, hey, this is something that happens, that people have these kind of things with alcoholism. And if you're struggling with this, like, we can, you know, we'll assist you along the way. We'll pray for you. We'll be understanding. It was like, no, it's like, you guys are just horrible, da da da. So anyway,
Wow.
I was not a very happy camper whenever I left Christianity, but I did wind up later on becoming a Christian, and that was only about 7 years ago. So, Harry, if you could choose one religion to be true, which one would it be?
Buddhism, I think.
Buddhism. He said Jainism.
Yeah. Jainism's not bad. I mean, they're both quite similar in a lot of their doctrine, like their practice, sort of don't harm things unnecessarily. I mean, Jainism's like, don't harm things at all. The Jains are the ones that wear that little mask over their mouth, right? That so you don't even accidentally breathe in a bug. So yeah, I think I'm quite close to that. I would go Buddhism because I like, particularly, I forget which one it is. I think it's Tao Buddhism, which is more like, hey, be really rational, be really skeptical. If something doesn't seem right, investigate it. You know, if the Buddha even stands in front of you and says something is wrong or something like that, you know, I don't know much about it, but if I were going to pick one to be true, it would be one that preaches things that I think are valuable for the world. And I think that's closest to that is Buddhism.
South Korea, you can actually pay some money and go stay at a Buddhist temple. So I went there and I was staying there for a while, and I asked the monk about nirvana. And the first thing he said to me, see I'm bald here, is he says, he goes, you'd make a great monk. So I don't have to worry about cutting.
Very little change.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Next question. Why is atheism getting weaker in its assertions? And let me say this. Hold on. Let me start off by prefacing this. So I want to say, okay, if you call yourself a lacktheist, like I lack a belief, I do want to say that is the only proposition in the world where people say that we lack a belief in something. Like if you come up to me and ask me about leprechauns, I'm going to tell you I do not believe that leprechauns exist. Okay, or I may be wrong. Leprechauns may exist. Bigfoot may exist. The Loch Ness monster most likely exists. But I would just tell you, I do not believe in it. Saying you lack a belief is such a weird way to phrase something like that. But I think the reason why atheists keep wanting to redefine what atheism is, because the atheism these days is so much different than the atheists that I grew up hearing. Is a totally different. So I do want to ask you, why do you think atheists are redefining themselves to say I lack a belief in something?
I think two things. I think one, it is more rational.
Okay.
And two, I think it is trying to, with good reason, make a bigger tent that more people can fall into it. Whereas, like, I came to atheism with the Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris ilk of that, like, you know, the Four Horsemen, and they were like firebrands, and them and Stephen Fry, and who was the other person, had that, like, is the Catholic Church a force for good in the world? And they would just sort of absolutely smash the, you know, from, and this was the problem. You would watch it from an atheist and you go, oh my God, they demolished them. And then you'd hear or go onto the sort of Twitter sphere or something of the Catholics, and they'd go, oh, we nailed it in that debate. And I was like, I started to have this thought that, like, sure, it's good fun to watch the blood sport, but is it persuasive? Does it create a big tent? So one of the things I also noticed was it was creating a really fun, like, fiery space for blokes who love an argument. But for blokes who don't like an argument, or women, not so much.
Sheila's.
So I think that, like, Sheila's, yeah. Like, for people who just get to that point where, like, I just don't think it's probable there's a God, and I don't really like talking about it, but I like to be able to share my doubt with others. I think that's important. I think that's why it kind of shifted. It was almost, it's almost a strategic shift in some ways, and a involuntary shift in others.
Kerry, that is an absolute brilliant, absolutely fascinating take. I'm not entirely sure how to process that just yet. I need to think on that a little bit more. But I will tell you, I've never heard anybody say that. That's great. And for the American listeners, bloke means like a guy. Like, it means like a chap.
Yeah.
Well, okay, a chap means a dude. Okay, over to you, Mr. Bear.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm still getting my head around this term lacktheist, because the fact is I used to believe. So even though I don't understand how you can go from believing to lacking the belief, it doesn't really align with my mental cognition. So I'm really trying to get my head around that term lacktheist, because, so, for example, like, I'll try to come up with my own analogy with this, and that is that one time I believed that films were shot in order. I used to believe that the start of a movie was the first shot of the movie. Like, as a kid, right? When you watch a film, you think, okay, this is when they started filming, and they went along and they filmed the end at the end. Now, I believe that. I believe that as a kid. However, as I learned the facts of movie making, I realized that the last shot was shot first, and etc. It's all shot out of order. We learn that as we get older. So it's not now that I lack the belief that films were shot in order. It's just that I don't believe that anymore. As you said, Isaiah, it's that you just don't believe that anymore.
Right.
So when you say I lack a belief that movies weren't shot in order, it doesn't make sense. I don't lack that belief. It changes.
Okay, so let me clarify. Let me clarify something. And actually, this is why I think the Dawkins scale is actually pretty good. I don't believe in a lot of stuff that Dawkins thinks and teaches, but this is actually something really good he's done, as far as it's a little bit more complex and nuanced just to say I believe in God or I don't believe in God, or I'm agnostic. There's some nuances in there. Okay. So one of them would be, well, first of all, what does it even mean to say I believe in something, right? Like, I would not say that I believe in God. I say that I know that God exists because I've experienced him. Just in the same way I would say I know that my daughter exists, okay? So I don't even use the word belief to talk about God.
What's the difference in those two for you? Because my understanding of the standard idea of belief is something that you hold to be the case or something like that.
Yeah, you hold. Okay, so I'm just going to read the Merriam Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster's, which you guys probably use the Oxford now that I think about it. You guys are Aussies, right?
Oh,
use the Queen's English.
will do.
Okay, but something that accepted, considered to be true, or held as an opinion, something believed, a conviction of the truth. So if you have a conviction of the truth, like I don't have a conviction that my daughter exists. Like I know she exists. It's not a conviction. It's not a belief. It's not something that I accept.
It's not a conviction.
I know. Well, I mean, technically speaking, good.
If I were to say, are you convinced your daughter exists? Would you not say, is conviction and convinced the same thing? Now that I ask it that way, I'm not sure it is.
Conviction in a theological sense is quite different, though, isn't it?
Is it?
If you're convicted, to be convicted is slightly different, isn't it, in terms of the theological worldview?
Oh, you're asking me? Sorry.
Anyone. Yeah, I would have thought that to be convicted would be something like, say, receiving the Holy Spirit. You would be convicted.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well,
in that
you sort of have conviction in your
Right. So this is okay. So this can be a little bit confusing, and I've never understood so much the need to clearly define things as when starting to talk about God and some of these things, because obviously you could use the word conviction to mean someone going to prison or something. Like he got convicted.
Sure,
it would be totally different.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yes,
and the same thing with faith. There are at least 10 different ways to define faith. Okay. You can say, like, my wife is faithful to me. I have faith that this is going to happen.
Yes.
It was a faithful adaptation. So when atheists say that Christians have faith, it is totally in a different way than, I just covered my eyes and there's a board of just a bunch of different religion. It's not at all like that. It's, do I have faith in God? Yes. Do I have faith that he exists? No. I know that he exists in the same way I know that this door exists, in the same way I know that my daughter exists. Okay.
So what's a word we could use so we could discuss it, it would all be saying the same thing?
Okay. Right. Okay. So belief, maybe conviction.
Conviction, sure.
Can we use that one?
So you have a conviction that God exists.
No, I have a knowledge that God exists. There's a difference. All right.
So the challenge we'll have with knowledge is if we hold to that idea of knowledge being justified true belief, and there's two people here that think that it's not true, we're going to have to pick a different one.
No. Okay. So let's understand that one specifically, because let's say I told you I had a daughter, and you don't know whether or not I do have a daughter, because she actually did walk into here off of camera, but you don't know that fact. You don't know if I have know if I have a son or not. So
right.
You can't have a justified belief one way or the other about. I could tell you that, and then you're just gonna have to take my word. I have a justified belief. I have a knowledge, right? I have a knowledge that my daughter exists. So it's a bit different in that sense. So you can't.
Yes. Sorry. I'm not about the justified or the or the belief. I'm on the true. Whether it's true. If you're going to say I have knowledge that God exists, and we would all, I guess I can just stipulate to say, I'm happy for you to say knowledge, even if it, I guess that would work for me.
Yeah. I don't want to get into the epistemology of this, because we'd have to have an entire discussion on that alone, because I do have a lot to say on that, but let's go on to the next question here. You guys ready for the next one?
Well, hang on. Before we go on to the next question, I want to know from you, why do you feel atheism is getting weak? Did we hear from Mr. Bear on this one? I think I'm the only one who's spoken on this issue.
We haven't gone here yet.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, Mr. Bear, I guess Mr. Bear first. Why do you think is atheism getting weaker in its assertions, and if so, why?
Well, yeah, here we have a little bit of a loaded question. Why is atheism getting weaker? Okay, well, that's how I took it anyway. Why is atheism getting weaker in its assertions? I don't personally feel it is getting weaker. I actually feel that the case for atheism is as strong as it ever was, or if not stronger, because and to clarify that, to extrapolate on that, I would say that as we go forward, I mean, we don't have to go that far back to realize what people believed, say, for instance, about the human body or the human consciousness. We can just go back to the 19th century to see that people thought there were essentially, 5 elements of the body. There was bile, there was blood, there was...
Yeah, the 5 humours, wasn't it?
The humours, right. Yeah, so we have to go, we don't have to go that far back to realize that people thought that life spontaneously was emerging from raw meat. You know, they saw maggots and so on. Right. So we don't have to go for that far back. So for me, going forward and how far we've come even in that time, we can see that with the gaining of knowledge and the gaining of how the naturalistic world works and seems to work in and of itself, we can see that, okay, so these are more blockages to believing that there are supernatural elements out there, because our perceptions have changed in such a short time. So I feel that in terms of atheism and no agency and no what can I say, supernatural cause for everything, including the cosmos, we can say that, well, it seems to be that it comports with what we're learning, especially over such a short time, that we can see that there are ebbs and flows within the natural world. So I could see it actually getting a little stronger rather than weaker.
All right. So I recently had this discussion about how I came to my atheism, and it was an extremely irrational way that I came to my atheistic beliefs. I had bad stuff happen to me, one, and then I had the experience, as I told you, in Bible college, where they were making fun of Bill Clinton, and I had this sexual dysfunction in my life, and I felt like these guys would hang me on a cross if they would have.
What did I miss? You had the sexual.
Yeah, Harry missed that. Yeah.
Oh, you got to tell me that bit. Come on, rewind a bit.
You have to rewind it. So the point is, though, is that I came to atheism by some extremely illogical beliefs. Okay. Now, that being said, while I was an atheist, I would have told you that God does not exist. Okay. Now, again, it would have been an irrational, my reasoning. I mean, I kind of look to science to answer these things, but how the universe came about and whatnot. But that's where I would have been in my atheism.
So irrational, it would have been irrational in what way?
Because whether or not I got abused as a kid is not relevant to whether or not God exists. So if I get abused by a kid, or if, okay, let's say, for example, atheists want to say like, oh, well, God did these genocides in the past. And okay, so what if he does it? Like, God didn't say whether or not he exists. Maybe he has some evil inclinations. Maybe he is evil. That has no relevance to whether or not he does exist or he doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, if he commands death upon people and says, "I am a jealous God," then don't get surprised when he kills people and behaves jealously. I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Well, did you ever see the movie Idiocracy?
Yes.
Yeah.
So did you see the there's like this sign where the guy's smoking, and the lettering comes up. It says, "If you don't smoke Tarleton's cigarettes, F you." And that's kind of like, for lack of better words.
Yeah.
For lack of better words, like, I know that's a very unarticulate way to say it, but that's kind of like, because that's what kind of like what the Bible is. Because had I written the Bible and I was God and I killed all these people, I would not have included that in my holy book. I'd have been like, I would have swept it under the rug. But that's kind of like what makes the Bible more believable to me, because it's like, well, if you don't like it, go fornicate yourself. Like, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Those aren't rational.
So do you think it could be, because it sounds like what you're describing, I think is fairly reasonable, which is I came to a position in an irrational way.
Right.
But I think we'd all agree it could be possible to come to the right conclusion even through an irrational reason.
Oh, absolutely.
Like I could say, I think it's midday because I'm itchy. And we go, that's a dumb method, even if it happens to be midday. So what was the way that you then came from atheism. Because what's interesting and echoes for me is a lot of people I've heard of faith who go, I was an atheist and I hated God. And I think that's a bad reason for doing it, which is like going, oh,
Right.
well, I looked around me, I saw suffering, I experienced suffering, and I went, no God would put me through this. And while it might be compelling, it's not necessarily logical. So can you walk us through, like, what was the journey then from that back to theism?
So I live in South Korea. I moved to South Korea to escape my parents because they were putting pressures on me. And I had to hide the fact that I like to drink and I like to fornicate. I like to sleep around. It took so much energy to prop up this hologram version of myself to go up and preach. And I would even do stuff like sleep with women in my office at church. Oh God forgive me.
You were more Catholic than you realized.
What?
Oh God, yeah. Well, I was an atheist though.
That's bang on brand for the Catholics.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I was an atheist though. So I was an atheist. I had to be a closet atheist for my parents because my mom told me, like, whenever I was like 20 years old, if I converted to Islam, she would not have a relationship with me. So it put a lot of pressure on me to perform. I had performance like anxiety. I needed to perform. Anyway, so I lived in South Korea. Here I could do drugs, sleep with prostitutes, drink till I throwing up every weekend. So one day I went on a hike in South Korea and I walked down on these boulders, and it probably took about 3 hours. And I remember after the first hour, I was like, God, when are these things going to end? Because at first you're like all happy, like, oh, this is great. We're talking about hours and hours later, 3 hours. I'm like, get me the hell out of this place. But I started to think like, okay, according to my worldview, this all just popped into existence from something, these boulders that are like the size of like Volkswagens, which are like cars. And I remember it caused that was like a crack in the ceiling. But the biggest crack in the ceiling that made me go into, I would call it deism, was going to North Korea and seeing the oppression of the people firsthand. And first of all, physically feeling the presence of evilness there. I mean, you could physically feel something that's wrong in this country. It's like, unless you've actually been there, it's hard to even put into imagination, but the propaganda, the music, everything. And we were put on a path to walk, whereas if we walked outside of this path, they would find us. As communistic as they were, they're always looking for ways to find you and stuff. It's ironic. But we came up to a crossroad where these North Korean people were there, and they looked like deers in the headlights, just because they're not supposed to communicate with us, but we're like right there.
Yeah, because they're like brought up from birth being like, Americans are evil and they want to destroy you. And then they'd be like, here's a tour group of them coming through. You'd be like, oh, it's the ones, they're here. I've heard of them. The prophecies spake of such a day. So,
I didn't make that connection, but that's totally right. Anyway, as I started to re-examine my atheism in the evolution that I believed in, I'm like, this makes total sense. Kim Jong-il, actually, because his father was in power, is more advanced. He's more highly evolved. He's higher on the food chain than these people. He's sharing them in the same way that I would share a sheep or milk a cow. And I'm like, this makes sense. And either I'm going to have to accept this and say that this is a logical conclusion. And I do want to get to something else. And I'll because this is leading right into the next question.
We'll have to get to the next bit in a moment because I'm desperate to get on that atheism allowing me to shear these people like sheep. But carry on, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Go on.
Sure. Yeah, it's going to come in. It's going to come in. Well, it was just a crack in the ceiling. I by no means became a Christian. I still wanted to do everything I was doing before. But I had to say, okay, there is some God out there that's going to hold us accountable at some time in the future. That was a crack in the ceiling for me. But I do want to get into the next question. And
well, I kind of want to explore that because it's a very interesting one, which I've heard a lot of theistic religious people describe, which is seeing. Sorry, you go on.
This just gets right into the next question because there's logical progression here. That's why I'm asking you guys these questions. But is atheism a dangerous worldview?
I wouldn't even classify it so much as strictly as a world view, because I think people are complicated. We take pies out of all different sorts of worldviews. It strictly isn't, I believe, no. Because even when people compare the worst of, if they refer to the worst atheists of history, which are the typical Stalin, Mao sort of arguments, when you look into their histories, Mao was exposed to Confucianism, so no one blames Confucianism for what Mao did. No one blames or the orthodoxy of churches of Russia for what Stalin did, even though he was exposed to those. It's very pick and choose, and no one brings up military might, megalomania, military power, political gain. No one seems to raise those in those arguments. So no, I don't think it of itself is a dangerous worldview as much as I don't believe in astrology or dowsing or any of those things as being dangerous in and of themselves either.
Okay.
Yeah, I have the dowsing debate with my family. I think it's I don't think it's not a I don't think it's just not a dangerous view. I think it is this view of saying I'm doubtful of things, and I'm doubtful of things in proportion to the evidence presented and the extraordinariness of the claim. And I think that's not just not dangerous. I think it's super important, because if you look at people like followers of Q, you know, we've all heard of QAnon.
Right.
Those to me are people who believe the extraordinariness of those claims and the terribleness of the evidence presented, like barely comprehensible bits of, you know, tweets that come from the, like, just such a low bar for what will I choose to believe, where I'm like, come on. But to me, what I think, and this is somewhat, I think I strawman religion with this, and I sort of hurl ridicule its way, possibly irrationally or possibly in an unfair way. But I think what religion does is it sort of says to people it's okay to accept these extraordinary explanations for things with very little evidence, and that opens the door where you end up going, of the QAnon believers, how many of them are religious? And it's like 99 to nearly 100%. I talk a lot of time with flat earthers. What proportion are religious? Nearly 100%. And like even down to the point of what are they called? Like there was an interesting case of this guy who yes, Trumpsters. You know, he's the God King. Where, oh, sorry, I've got somebody's joined in on chat, and now I don't know where to put it on the screen. It'll go behind me. And is this live? Hello, Wesley. Hi, can you read this? Is this live? Yes, I can. Strong believing Satanist. I'll read those in a moment. We'll get to those in a moment. Where I think that what it does is open the door. That's what I was saying. There was this case of this girl, this I think she was from a Mormon family, who got kidnapped by a chap that smelt of urine and booze, who crept through her window in the night and said, I'm God, I'm one of his prophets, come with me. And what I worry is there's no how do you when you tell somebody that angels walk the earth, how do you then introduce to them a good bar for reason and skepticism, where they go, I need to weigh this. That's extraordinary that an angel cut through my fly screen window and stinks like piss, but needs me to come with him now. And if I don't have an effective method for throwing out those things, for saying that's too extraordinary, I'm sorry, sir, I'm going to need more evidence before I willingly go with you, then yeah, so I see it as not just positive but necessary.
Are you talking about
long answer? I'm sorry.
Are you talking about Elizabeth Smart? Because I think she was the one that got kidnapped by the.
Could have been, yeah. That sounds right.
So, okay, so that first of all, I do want to say something that what you said right now, I actually completely agree with almost everything that you said, because I do think that religious people can be some of the most gullible people that I've ever met. So they are, and sadly enough, they are the ones who are the strongest Trump supporters, you know. And then it's ironic because he was saying so many things that were so antithetical to Christianity, and it was ironically like the atheists who were standing up the most to people like him, the non-believers. So I do got to give proper credence to what you just said right now. So I do believe in that. But okay, so that being said, I do want to dismiss one thing though, is to say that atheism is not a worldview. That is absolutely not true. The only way you could possibly reject that God exists, even if you only believe in it, even if it's not that you have knowledge of it, is to think that the world could operate, the universe could come about by naturalistic means. Okay, so to say we're just people who just lack a belief, and that's all. Atheists like to say we don't assert anything, we don't have any beliefs, we don't have any ethics, da da da. Well, first of all, that's part of the problem, that you guys don't have ethics, as you say.
Well, that's another one.
Well,
all right, I got to put it on the list.
So that,
I didn't get to go back to the other one
on the list.
So first of all, that's part of the problem, okay, in the first place. But there are implicit things that follow as a result. Okay, if you believe that everything came about by naturalistic means, first of all, you have to say that things evolved. Okay, so things evolved, and
Yes.
and an implication of survival of the fittest is that the things at the top eat the things that are below them. So in North Korea, this literally happens. People eat each other in North Korea. So in the famine, hold on, let me finish, please.
Sorry.
In the famines, that was the philosophy of the government. They're like, well, if we don't feed people, they're going to eventually resort to cannibalism, and we're going to weed out the weakest among us. So these things naturally follow that if this is what you believe in, if this is how you believe how we got here, then we're just a little higher above bacteria or monkeys or whatever. There's no intrinsic value or objective value in human life. I'll just say that. Okay, go ahead.
So I think there's a few things about that there's the one thing which is often gets conflated, which is evolution is about how life diversifies. It's not about how life first came to be. That's abiogenesis. And there's loads of theories on that, but none of them really have quote unquote solved it. Not that science solves anything. Whereas evolution, even though science doesn't solve things, is a pretty solved matter, but that's only talking about the diversification of life. And it doesn't suggest that we are more evolved than monkeys. And it definitely doesn't suggest to me that Kim Jong-un or any individual within a species is more evolved than another. We are as evolved as monkeys. It's just given the places we went to, the sort of the evolutionary pressures upon us made us evolve in different ways that we are now, depending on how you call advanced. We are more advanced. I get to have a microphone and a shirt, and monkeys don't. What I would agree with is it is somewhat amoral in that it doesn't present a reason why punching a baby in the face is wrong, even though all of us, I think, here would go, hey, let's not punch babies in the face. But I don't think that means that any individual atheist doesn't have ethics. It just says we don't get it from our atheism. Just the same as you don't get whether punching babies in the face, which isn't mentioned in the Bible, is wrong. Or indeed, when it says don't wear mixed fibers and you go, you don't get whether to decide that's right or wrong from the Bible. I think we do get it, but we get it from somewhere else. And then we put it in the Bible.
Bear?
I'd like to take it back a little bit in terms of the atheism as a worldview angle. So just going back a little and rewinding, where I come from is that considering that atheism is a worldview, kind of limits the overall aspect of how you view things, because what I'm trying to say is that it really only deals with God or gods, and if you believe in gods or if you don't. For me, I'm also a fiction writer, so I write crime novels. I've written 2 crime novels, and so I've always written. Cool. Yeah, I've written crime stories and cartoons and comics. I've always been fairly imaginative, even as a kid. So for me, this comes down to, this isn't a personal attack on you as or Christians or any theist really. It's really just, for me, it's going to sound bad, but it's a lack of imagination for me. That there it is.
No offense,
that's great.
No. I mean this in all due respect. There's a lack of imagination. Let me just expand really quickly. What I mean by that is that there was talk of a cyclical model for the universe, right? There was a possibility that the cosmos is cyclical. There's no cause. It just goes on. It crunches, it expands, it crunches, it expands. But who knows that it wasn't, say, a pulse that created this? Who's to say that it wasn't I'm going to be ludicrous for the point of example, a ballpoint pen somewhere that created you. We really just do not know. Maybe sometime down the track we could know. I don't know. But the thing is that it's a lack of imagination on our part to say it's either this A or not A. So for me, that's where I come from. It's just a lack of perhaps vision in terms of, hey, what are the possibilities? I mean, we thought the world was on a turtle at one stage. So who knows? We don't know.
Okay, so you are familiar with the logical, the logical argument of the excluded middle, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so for the lay person, it's like it's either you're A or B, either you're male or female. Actually, that's probably not the best. Maybe you could be intersex or non-binary. I'm sorry.
No.
Not,
Yeah.
Okay.
You're male or not male, I think is what you want to say there.
No, let's forget
that would be
gender.
the law of the excluded
because you could
middle.
be zero.
It is
zero.
like
Okay. Yeah. Let's say that's the case, but for something else, like this is either a cup or it's not a cup, right? All right.
Yeah.
So either there is a God or there isn't, right? Either I'm totally wrong, and it doesn't matter what I feel about it. I could be absolutely furious about the fact that God doesn't exist, or either he does exist and it's irrelevant your objections to whatever is in the Bible, or right. So I can't get angry that God doesn't exist and therefore he exists, right? It's either this or that. So if you're saying that there's not a God, okay, if this is something you're going to say, I don't know the extent you want to say that you believe that, or you just lack a belief, but if that's what you actually say, and this is why I don't accept the premise that atheism is not a worldview. It absolutely is a worldview, because it's either A or B. It's either God exists or God doesn't exist. All right. So if he doesn't exist, then this would have had to have happened entirely naturally. All right. There's no other way to get around that. Either you have like a first mover, or somehow or another this universe is able to create itself. And that's what you believe in, and that's fine. That's fine. You could believe that all you want, but understand that is a worldview. That is.
It reduces it to a dichotomy, though. It's a dichotomy. No, I think it's a false one.
Yeah, because it could be possible to me. Like, to me, it's just a position of holding doubt. So I just go, I think it's unlikely. It is still possible there's a God. It is also possible the sort of God is dead theory is also possible. So a deist kind of thing where God did create it, sort of tipped that first domino that led to all of creation, but then popped out of existence or got bored and died,
committed suicide,
accidentally hung himself while wanking. We don't know.
Oh,
but
God.
Asphyxiation, I thought it was.
it's sort of it's entirely possible. And so to me, it's just like going, yeah, it could be a chunk of things. So it does include that all of life started, all of every existence started from some point of a singularity that had no cause before it. To me, it makes my mind fold inwards. So, and it's an unanswerable question. So I kind of go, meh, I don't know. I will be really interested in listening to answers, but then I want those answers to be kind of comprehensible and comprehensive, and then get to a point where I go, maybe not, and then hold them with that. And I don't think we fix it by just going, God did it. Because every question that makes us require to put God there, well, something had to start it, still can be applied to God. Well, what made God? And if I can keep asking the question until I get back to require a God, or what made that? What made that? Well, nothing, I don't know, therefore God. Why can't I just keep going with that same line of questioning that made me get to the point where I needed him? So it's sort of, it doesn't solve the problem. It just invokes something extra special to solve a problem that I created, where I think it's easy to go, maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it is, but I don't, of the available answers, none of them compel me thus far.
All right. So I just want to get into ontology for a quick second with both of you guys, because you understand, at least ontologically, God can potentially be proven to exist, correct?
Sure.
There's a potential. Absolutely. There is not the potential to disprove God. Okay. So this is not your fault. This is not my fault. This is just by the very nature of the issue that we're dealing with. Okay. So the fact that you do not know that God exists, you said we can't know. Well, that means you don't know. How could you project what's someone else's experience? Like, for example, last week, I might have gotten abducted by aliens, and they might have taken me on a trip of the solar system and brought me back here and put me where I am right now. And how would you know if that exists or not? I mean, obviously that didn't happen, but you don't have any way of knowing that. So when I tell you I've had an experience with my daughter or my son, how do you know whether or not I have a daughter or a son? Right? Are you convinced right now that I have a daughter from what I told you? Okay. Are you convinced
that I showed me her in a previous call?
Okay. Are you
I'll take you at your word. Yep.
She could be adopted or whatever. She could either be my
neighbor.
Yeah.
I'll take you at your word. It's the extraordinariness of that claim is like that. Yeah.
So what about the fact that I have a son? Are you agnostic? Are you agnostic on that, or do you believe that, or what do you believe?
I would equally take you at your word.
Okay. See, I don't have a son. All right. I don't. I have one daughter. Well, I don't know. Technically speaking, I could have some son out there, but I was quite a crazy guy before. But the point is that because you don't have knowledge about something, it doesn't tell you anything about what someone else's knowledge could be, right? So to say we can't know, that's not really an intellectually dishonest way, honest way of reasoning. Say, I don't know. Maybe I could know at some other point. Maybe other people do know, but I just currently don't know right now. That being said, oh, good.
I think we could know if God exists. I just think that typically, and this is the point I think that you were making before, Mr. Bear, I think that typically God defines itself, or people define God as a God of the gaps, of a sort of like, I think it probably used to be used to describe everything, including why sunflowers turn to face the sun, like everything. And then as we went, hang on, there's this, and hang on, there's that, and da 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 da, and atoms and this and that, and so we go, there's no longer humors, so we no longer need humors to explain that, because it turns out there's viruses and bacteria and da 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 da. The place that God has shrinks. So I think it's certainly it's possible to know if a God exists, but the way, that's why I would say I'm a hard agnostic, is because it redefines itself every time we get a better view of reality. It sort of shrinks into a smaller and smaller corner of darkness of we don't know. Like, think about how the place it so often comes to in these discussions that we have to go back 14 billion years and ask like an incredibly incomprehensible question as to like quarks and quasars and a point of singularity and the expansion of the universe to go, now we know where God exists. It seems like it's just a placeholder for ignorance.
Okay. That's fine.
I call it the metaphysical Tinder merry-go-round. Is that
go on?
What I mean is that you continually are swiping left, and you eventually come back around to the very first perhaps modal structure, I suppose. You know, you'll log onto your app and it says there are modal structures here. Swipe left. These are the basis to these modal structures. Swipe left. It goes on and on and on until you come back to there are modal structures in the right. So I call it the metaphysical Tinder roundabout, not merry-go-round.
That's a good one. I didn't laugh initially because I was like, "Where's he going with this?"
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a bit more lighthearted, but that's how I sort of, because everyone's so eager to impose their syllogisms onto their ontological arguments, and they just debate it endlessly. It's fascinating. Fascinating, don't get me wrong, but I find it just, you go around and around.
First of all, before we get into this last question, I really want to thank both of you guys. This has been an extremely civil and extremely lighthearted conversation. It might not be in about 5 minutes when we get to the last but we also like to talk about things that we might find in common. So what kind of wine are you drinking right now?
I think it'll be a Chardonnay. It is a Kings Valley Chardonnay.
From Aussie?
Come on, focus. It's not a face. There we go. I feel like a makeup blogger. Oh, that's right. I've got to flip the camera. Aussie, I hope so. I try to get from Aussie just because I feel, Will Briggy, New South Wales.
Nice.
Hold on. For the record, someone just said evolution is not levels. That's a human projection. I said that this was Kim Jong-un's way of thinking. I did not agree to that myself. I'm just telling you how people could get this into their mind. Okay.
It's funny how much dissonance that spiked in me too, because I also recognized some of the truths of what you said about that flagged it. And it's some of what I think caused the dissonance to spike further, which is I was reading recently because I want to make a murder mystery game. And I was like, oh, I'm going to make it about the stolen generation in Australia, which is this thing we had in the sort of, I think 20s leading up to 70s, where we would go, oh, Aboriginal people aren't good at looking after their kids. We'll snatch them away. So I started to do some reading about it and found that it actually came from Darwinism. So once Darwinism became this huge thing, they went, Aboriginals, less evolved. We need to look after them. They're going to die out as a species. That's unfair to their kids. So we're going to start amalgamating them into. And so I do think it's easily possible to get something, whether it's true or not, and go and sort of get bizarre ideas from it. I think that what's worse is if it's true, like the splitting of the atom. Because it's true, we can force multiply how terrible we can be with it, that you go, now we can make an atomic bomb because the underlying thing is describing reality.
And for the record, Harry, I do want to interject one point, because people talk about how religion and Christianity can stunt science and et cetera, et cetera. Well, that might actually be a good thing in the end, because one of the answers to the Fermi paradox is that maybe these other societies, whatever civilizations have evolved, and then their technology, they just destroyed themselves. So we're clearly on that trajectory right now. And so maybe religion can help put an ethical restraint to some of the technological things we can't do. Anyway, I don't want to.
Certainly likes holding back science. I would agree with you there. Sorry, no shots fired. I was joking.
Okay. By the way, you guys, so you're drinking that. What kind of beer alcoholic beverages do you guys like?
I like Hans Super Dry.
Foster's?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Standard answer you'll get across Australia. No.
No one
Australian for haha, we sold you cat's piss.
Yeah.
But there's this commercial that says beer, Australian for beer. That's a literal commercial.
Yeah, Foster's.
Right.
All right, last question. Is atheism a cult?
Here we go.
Yes or no?
It depends on where you're looking, because it definitely is in some facets online. It definitely is a cult in terms of online personalities. People flock to various personalities online. I think there's a very human need to connect with one another, and I think there's a very human need to find, kindred spirits, to coin a phrase, to be part of a group. And I feel that yes, there are elements, cultish elements to it. Generally, though, I don't see it in real life. I know I have family members who are atheists. I have friends who are. They do not adhere to a leader in the definition of the word. Okay, if we look at the definition of cult, it relates to there being a leader, at least some doctrines to follow, and there aren't in atheism. But definitely online, on YouTube and Twitter and various social media platforms, yeah, I can see a definite cult leaning to some elements of this. And I just put it down to the fact that people need to connect in some way. And they are the names, probably I'm not going to name any, but we all know who they are. They're the names that come up when you go online. They just pop up in your recommended feeds, your algorithms, your as soon as you hashtag certain words, they come up in your suggestions and friend suggestions. So it seems to be that technology does help form these little cultish pockets and followings. So yeah.
That's the most honest. That's the most honest answer I've ever heard. Thank you very much, Harry.
Good.
Yeah. So I'd say no. And I think I want to also sort of stipulate too, I don't know what that actually means. I think I want to agree with where I think you're coming from, Isaiah, and the point you're making, Mr. Bear, which is that there are elements that you could say, well, that's kind of cult-like, that we do not like or deal with dissent or different views. So when somebody goes, oh, look, I'm an atheist, but I think something could have created everything, people are like, no, that's not what we believe. You're not actually an atheist. Get out. So I want to agree with those bits, but, and I hate using the word but, no, but I use it all the time. What I think often happens, and I try really hard to avoid, is the sort of that language is becoming hyperbole so often that things are either awesome or fantastic, and I think we sometimes do it just to sort of be fun or whatever else, and often do it to make a point. And I don't like the sort of meaninglessness it devolves into, where I think a cult is a really clearly defined thing, as Magnus has just asked in the chat, where people sometimes go, well, Christianity is a cult. You look at the definition of cult and it's definitely one. No, it's not. Not even Christianity is. Where cult, to me, one of the main things, there's a checklist for what makes a cult, and I'll pull it up in a second, but one of them is follows a single living leader. No, it doesn't.
Okay.
Sure,
that's not
the
true.
Catholic
That's not
Church
true.
has got the Pope. And
that's
but
not true.
one of the ones that's key to me is it separates people from other people and discourages intermingling with the outside. I don't think Christianity does that. I definitely don't think atheism does that. I think atheism is sort of one of the things most atheists accept is most of the people you're going to bump into for your day-to-day are going to be religious.
Right.
So you definitely intermingle with them. You don't sort of join a commune. So I really don't think it's a cult. Yeah. What are your thoughts on it, Isaiah? Because I feel like you're presenting the case that it is. So maybe we should let you present it and respond to that.
Yeah. So first of all, that was a question. That was not me asserting that it was a question, but I do want to say it may not technically be a cult, but it is pretty dang close. And I'm going to tell you the reason why. First of all, you said that it needs a leader. That's absolutely not true. QAnon, by definition, would be, or Trumpism would be a cult. I guess you have it with Trump. You have some kind of a leader, but it does not. First of all, it does not need to be a spiritual group, all right, to have cultish thinking. So you don't need a god. You don't need anything like that. Christianity was actually called a cult. First starting up, and one of the reasons why is because cults have small fringe way of thinking that have bizarre bizarre beliefs. Okay, so I would call atheism very close to a cult for several reasons, but one of them is there's some very bizarre teachings. One, two, there is harmful effects on the people who are let's call them cultists. But so atheism has some very harmful results to atheists. The next one is that.
Can you tell me again the second one? Sorry, there's also a bit of a delay here. I'm sorry. Tell me again the second one.
It has harmful effects on the cultists. Okay, and the last one is that people, there's this idea of dissenting views. Okay, so for example, Richard Dawkins recently made some kind of statement about transgendered people, not in the slightest sense of the word transphobic. It wasn't a matter of fearing or belittling them. He was just making some kind of scientific statement, and all of a sudden he got dogpiled by all the atheists. They took away some kind of honorary award they gave him, and in this community online, T-Jump, he recently had a couple of debates on the trans issue, and again, all the people who were his supporters suddenly jumped ship because he expressed a dissenting opinion. And finally, one last time, I just had a conversation with a former atheist who converted to Islam, and he told me, in fact, it's the last one in our conversation. We had a conversation with a Jew and a Muslim, and he told me about the level in which he received death threats and was viciously assaulted verbally by atheists. And he was showing the hypocrisy that when this guy had left the JW faith, which you might call a cult as well, them and Mormons, and they don't have one specific leader. So that's why that definition doesn't work at all. But he said that the way that they were like, oh my God, how could someone divorce them? How could someone break up this family because this person had a different religious, they deconverted for something, while he deconverted from atheism, and this is the way that he was treated by atheists. So yeah, there you go.
So bizarre teachings has harmful effects on the cultists, on the atheists themselves, that dissenting views are punished, and that there are death threats or poor treatment, discouragement of apostasy or people leaving this cult.
Apostasy,
is that the gist of it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess some of it I would go almost jump back to QAnon Trumpism as a cult. Yeah, people call it that, but I argue with that too. Christianity was a cult. Yes. While Christianity was alive, the early days of Christianity, my understanding is yes. There was this like, give up all your possessions and follow me, very culty. While there is a living Jesus, yes. After he's been crucified, I think you could probably call it still a cult, but I think I'm not sure. Yeah. Whereas I guess we need to come up with a clear definition of cult because I think we're disagreeing on that view of whether it requires an alive leader and
it doesn't. So
the exclusion or the separation of us and them, even physically, to me is an important part of a cult. But to you, it sounds like it's not. Is that the case?
Okay. Well, I think you're referring to the bite definition where you're all right. And again, there are some extreme versions of cults, right? The JWs or the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, atheists love to call those people cults. Okay. They love to make those kind of assertions, but they're obviously not like a Branch Davidian or People's Temple, in Guyana with Jim Jones. So there are some extreme
that's
versions.
That's a cult to me.
Right. Okay.
Right. But you're saying that's an extreme cult. I see. Okay.
Okay. So
what would you say are the most bizarre? Oh,
I think there's, again, it's a definitional term, isn't it? What do we consider a cult? Because as you may consider a cult a slightly different thing to what we do as well. So at a foundational level, we have to sort of agree generally what a cult is. For me, my perception of a cult is almost the standard definition, which is near religious veneration and devotion to a particular figure or object, as I look it up.
Right.
The dictionary term here. So, yeah.
Right.
So,
okay. Just for the record, though, then the thing that we would say that atheists worship is either scientism or just humanism as well. So that's what
humanism.
Okay. So
yeah,
in modern English, hold on. Let's go with this one. A cult is a social group, which they are. It's defined by unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs, which I would definitely say the belief that everything popped into existence out of nothing is a very unusual belief. They have a common interest, particularly object or goal. Okay, so yeah, atheists do have a goal to desecularize the world and to promote ethics that are very counter to the survival of humanity, if I'm going to be honest. But
counter to the survival of humanity. Whoa. Okay. So there's two things I kind of wanted to.
As well.
What was that?
I like the counter to survival of humanity. I'll go on, Mr. Burr.
Sorry, Harry. Talking over. You threw in a few good little bombs in there because you've really generalized, and I think from talking to both Harry and I, you've probably realized that we're probably not the standard generalized atheists. That
you guys are awesome. You guys are awesome.
that belief that everything came from nothing. It's just something I don't believe that. Just to put it out there.
To be honest, I think what happens is we hear atheists debate theists. The theists go to where did everything start from, and the atheists, I think, are stupid and get tricked into a debate about astrophysics that neither they nor their interlocutor nor the audience understand the first thing of it. Because my understanding of the Big Bang Theory is that it is based on one observation, and that is redshift. And we go, if everything's redshifting, and I think there's something else to do with background radiation and different measurements of redshift. My understanding is it's just redshift. Are the planets are the other stars moving away or getting closer? If they're moving away, then from there, our minds go, boom, and we just make up shit. We go, well, if they're all moving away, then they must have started at a central point. If they all started at a central point, there must be a singularity. Let's start crunching numbers based on that assumption. And I think that assumption's bunk. And I think that atheists are silly to assert that, because when we're living our lives, I get that creation is a really important part of a religious person's life. In fact, when you talk to many people about why they became religious, they go, I looked around at all creation and I went, oh, it's got to be special. So that made me conclude it's not typically the reason most people become atheist. It's a non-part of my atheism. Where things came from is still a question for me. And the answer to that is, I don't know. The reasons I'm an atheist is much more, I have really simple, comprehensible explanations for why religion is probably man-made. And I don't think it solves problems in any meaningful way. It doesn't really relate to me to the start of all existence. That's a non-part of it for me. What are your thoughts on it, Mr. Bear?
Yeah, I'm on very similar lines. As I've mentioned before, I feel it's just in some terms a lack of vision in terms of where everything came from. So
lack of creativity, imagination.
Yeah, look, I'm just being honest. I just believe that it is a lack of a certain vision, because people always say, to put it another way, okay, well, what would convince you, right? What would convince you that God, any God existed? And then you have to say, well, I can imagine something pretty damn spectacular, and if that God can't do it, then I'm talking about moving things around and putting on an amazing light show that you've never seen before. I mean, I can imagine some pretty cool things, right? So I mean, let's just start there, right? Start there and just do some really cool shit. But one of the things I have learned from this side of things in terms of post deconversion is just not to generalize. I'm not preaching to you, Isaiah, at all. I'm just saying it's that generalization, because I came out of it initially being quite hostile towards Christians who questioned my lack of conviction, right? They were on social media questioning me consistently and constantly. So I would push back. And then I realized, hey, some of these guys were actually cool. They were just sort of asking questions. And that's where I realized I had to park that and let it go. Get rid of that generalization, tarring the brush, everyone with the same brush. Right. Well, I had to realize everybody is different and everybody believes different things for different reasons. We are all complicated and we all take little slices of the pie to form our worldviews and where we come from. Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think is key about a cult, which is it becomes totalitarian in that your views must conform with everybody else that's part of this cult. Or you're out. Either we don't have a view on this, like ice cream, vanilla and chocolate are equally good as an ice cream, but once the cult leader decides that it is vanilla, we all must agree. And I don't think that's the case for many large religions, and I certainly don't think that's the case for atheism.
Yeah, especially when Dawkins is involved. So, especially with Dawkins. I don't follow Dawkins. I don't care about him.
I dislike him. I think he demonstrates that he is not actually doesn't have the courage of his convictions with how he delivers his message, because if it's about adjusting your methods based on evidence, evidence is calling people an idiot doesn't work, and he doesn't follow that. But I want to kind of go back to this. The assumption in question 3 was, why is atheism getting weaker? If it's getting weaker, how's it a cult?
That's actually not even. That's a non sequitur, to be honest with you. But I was talking about the assertions, and I wasn't okay. Actually, atheism is growing in that sense, so it has nothing to do with strength. Yeah. So you're. I don't want you to equate that I'm making any connection between those two. I was just saying, why is it becoming a smaller target to try to hit? Because I mean, atheism.
Which do you mean?
Well, because
when you say smaller target.
Okay, because the atheists that I grew up listening to, would say that God does not exist. All right. So this new kind of atheism is like, all right, well, let's just really go after more of their religion than the actual God. Right. Let's be an anti-theist, for example. Right.
Sure.
Hitchens. I think Hitchens was, and he also writes a book called God Is Not Great. So that implies that God is out there somewhere. So it's I don't know. It's a bit odd to me, it's a bit odd the way to phrase something. I lack a belief in something. Saying that you have a belief in something already implies that you don't have actual that you don't have actual proof that it exists in the first place, right? So it's just such a, like, if you ask me, do I believe in the flying spaghetti monster? I'm going to tell you, I do not believe in the flying spaghetti monster. Very straightforward.
But that's just because you haven't been touched by his noodly appendage.
No, you know what? I don't say this lightly, man. You guys are freaking awesome. I have so thoroughly
It's been a
enjoyed this.
good fun chat. Yeah.
You guys are some good blokes. I do see, just my problem, and here's what my problem is with the most atheists. Okay, like if you lack a belief in something, that's fine. I don't have an issue with just atheists say, okay, I don't have a belief in God. That's fine. But that's not where a lot of atheists stop. Is that you have to be an idiot, you have to be a fool, you have to be an unethical person to accept a God belief, right?
Yes, I think they do say that, and I think they are stupid, wrong, and counterproductive.
Yeah. Well,
they are just, look at the evidence. The evidence says that doesn't work. The evidence also says that's not true. So don't say it to people, because it pushes them away. It makes atheists look like assholes, and
there seems to be a
makes them
between,
hardens their heart to your message.
Yeah, there seems to be a disconnect between the humanistic side of atheism, and I don't get that. I don't get that they espouse humanistic values and then don't demonstrate them. I mean, well,
I think it's I go into the politics and religion
some.
server. Yeah. I go into the politics and religion server on Discord, and I've talked there to quite a few atheists. I went in there theists. I went in there the other day, and this is true as much of atheists and theists. Went in there the other day and went into a room where two grown men were having an argument about one man's masturbation habits, telling him he's going to hell and all sorts of stuff. And then I click over to the atheism room, and there's just a dog pile of like 20 atheists ripping strips off a theist. And then I go into another room where I had the displeasure of talking to Mr. Batman, who just
yes sir, yes sir, yes sir.
Oh my God, just offensively.
And
I think, and what I think it is people, blokes particularly, like shitting on other blokes. Like we like feeling smarter than other people and crushing them, and owning them.
Yeah, very egomaniacal. Yeah, very ego. Yeah.
And there's no special place that I would carve out that atheists don't do that. Like we do just as much as religious folk. In fact, I think more so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to get some last thoughts. And I do want to say that you guys probably don't even come close to falling on the cultish behavior the reason why I label it. I think I would label the more extreme elements and more abusive elements, that is cultish thinking. Maybe guys like you just were not convinced. All right, like no problem at all. You guys, we could have conversations from here to kingdom come. The thing is why I use atheist co-hosts is because I think about, like, in my vision, if I'm looking at the world with one eye shut, I'm only going to see certain things. I'm have this huge blind spot over here. By allowing someone to ask questions that I wouldn't ask, or to critique my religion, my beliefs, it's been very helpful to me. And we have respect, we have empathy. We don't try to immediately just discount and disprove each other. We're generally trying to see things from a different perspective. So it's RG Podcast. Respect, humility, empathy. You can check us out at rhepodcast.com or on YouTube. And yeah, I really want to thank, I can't even tell you how much I thank you guys. We need more of this. So Richard Bear, you got any last thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I really respect where you're coming from, because you don't see this a lot in the larger channels, in the larger, outreach. There are great channels and social media profiles out there. But a lot of them do tend to rely on the clicks and the money and the revenue. So we need to sort of get away from that and just focus on where we see eye to eye. It's a really optimistic, rainbow view of the world. But the fact is that I'm sure each and every one of us have both theists, deists, atheists in our family, agnostics. We don't love them any less for that, because of that aspect. Perhaps because of their characteristics. I mean, let's be honest, we can't pick family, right? But I think that's how I live my life. I don't live my life adhering to any principles other than what I myself can stand by. So I need to defend my position, and I realize that. So when people ask me questions, I can go, this is why I am the way I am, and what I think the way I think, and what I believe. So, and I have to have that conviction in that way to substantiate my position. So, and I feel that I do. I'm comfortable with that. So, when you're comfortable, I think you don't tend to lash out because you are willing to listen, and I think that's important. Yeah. So thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
This has been good. Yeah.
And Harry?
Yeah, it's funny because what you're saying, I think you're both right about it. And some of them, what I think is there a way to do both? Like, is there a way to have a nice conversation with respect and humility and empathy, and have that? And like, also some of what you were just saying, Mr. Bear, is like, how can I almost give people a playbook for how to have these conversations, be you theist discussing it with an atheist or vice versa, an effective way where you can have the fieriness, but then get back to a more even or effective place? Well, I think both are effective. Like, I know that some of my positions have changed because somebody like really staunchly kind of just smashed the position, mocked it a bit, but then there was the love. And so there's something I got really interested in that led me to the coaching and stuff I do now, which is called provocative, which is this idea that you could take the piss and still be loving with it. And that's what I'm somewhat interested in kind of finding, because we've taken the piss out of one another a bit today. And then also the other thing is then that can get you, because without the audience, like if we stay as all of us, like a couple of hundred subscribers, like as much as it's like, oh, it's not about the views, it is. Like if I stay at a couple of hundred subscribers, I've failed. So I think there is also something about creating a bit of like, maybe not blood sport, like maybe not Roman Colosseum, but like boxing match. You know what I mean? Like a bit of a joust and a bit of a like, it's a
Well, maturity helps with that, right?
Yes. And something I also found I learned a lot in the time I lived in India was you could see people have like a knockdown, drag out argument, but then be like, they're okay. Yeah. Like the ability Indian people over other people had of just being like, zoom, the dissonance and everything, just the adrenaline just drops again. And then we're back to like, okay, you're good. Come around to my place and we'll have some chai. That I think might be something to learn from. Certainly for me as well.
So just, I do want to say one last thing is I would definitely like to feature both of you guys on my channel as the feature channels, because you guys are extremely respectful, extremely intelligent. Harry, a little bit less so. But no, really.
I'm getting drunk.
You can't use a computer. You dropped out halfway through. Come on.
Yeah.
I was swearing at that. I was a god to curse.
Damn it.
I have some resources I'd like to make available to you guys, and I really hope that we could collaborate in the future, because this is just I'm kind of at a loss for words, because you guys are just such gentle. Well, I guess you're Aussies, so you guys got to be proper and British. Yeah. So really, thank you guys. Really, thank you.
I really appreciate it. It's been great. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to more collaborations in future for sure.
All right.
Yeah. I think you've also done a really good job of sort of being our steward for this, sort of moderating this discussion as well, Isaiah, and also like really, I think, clever and brave of you to be like, I'm going to go 2 atheists. I think it's really cool. You've handled it well, but you're also like, bring it on. I'll take all of you. So like the fun, the humor, I love it. I'd absolutely be delighted to do this again.
All right. Thank you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Well, as you guys say, good day, Mike.
Sonorous, beautiful voice. Excellent.
Good day,
mate. Catch you later.